A very good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome to our thematic panel series across the table as part of our public concentrations for India's Science, Technology, and Innovation Policy 2020. We are very glad to have our panelists, interested viewers, and the spirited team behind this unique initiative. I am Radhika Trikha from STIP2020 Secretariat, and I will be the moderator for today's session, along with Ms. Vanshika Singh, a Senior Research Fellow at National Brain Research Centre, Bangalore. Before starting the session, I will briefly introduce the STIP 2020 initiative. It's a joint initiative of an Office of Principal Scientific Advisor to Government of India and Department of Science and Technology. This initiative is to bring the new Science, Technology and Innovation Policy 2020. The STIP 2020 formulation process is divided into 4 tracks, starting with the track 1 that includes wider public consultation, track 2 that is an expert-driven consultation, track 3 in which ministries and states and UTs would be roped in, and track 4, the final phase in which ethics level committee will take up all track 1, track 2, track 3 and come up with the final STIP 2020 that is Science, Technology, Innovation Policy. So these thematic panel series are an exclusive part of track 1 consultation. Today's panel on STI governance and system interconnectedness is the 7th panel session of this series. The underlying idea is to link the track 1 in which we would be extending support from the public and our expert panelists to draw some policy inputs that will be incorporated into a track 2 that is an expert-driven policy drafting. So in this panel series, we will be having experts drawn from our thematic groups. We are having 21 different thematic groups catering to different regions of science, technology, and innovation. The objective is to make more voices heard in this policy and make it totally participatory policy-making process. So I request our widest audience to use hashtag #AskSTIP2020 governance to post out their questions, their queries, their comments related to the policy input. I also request them to write their name and place their question to our esteemed panelists. So today's panel is on science, technology, and innovation governance aspects and system interconnectedness. In India, we have number of good working public-private partnership initiatives. We have strong industry academia interconnections going on. We have a somewhere strong governance mechanism also. But how they can be strengthened at the wider level. So today we would be coming up with discussion on the same. With this, I request my co-moderator, Ms. Vanshika Singh, to introduce our panelists for this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Radhika. A very warm welcome to our esteemed panel this evening. We have with us Ms. Deepanwita Chattopadhyay. She is the chairman and CEO of IKP Knowledge Park and has been the pioneer in developing the first life science research park in India. She has made liaisons with various public and private enterprises, both indigenously and globally, to fund over 150 healthcare product innovators and startups. She has been implementing a large number of brand challenges programs in India as well. She is a key member of the governing body of the National Institute of Immunology, Lucknow Biotech Park, NCR Biotech Science Cluster, among many other bodies of repute. Welcome you, ma'am. We're also extremely glad to have Dr. Satya, a technology policy leader with us. Dr. Dash was a former head of strategic partnerships and entrepreneurship development unit of BIRAC. He conceptualized, designed, and implemented 15 national programs such as BIC, India's largest biotech funding program, SPARSH, which is a social innovation program, and BioNest, which is an incubator program, among many others. He's currently member, board of NCL Venture Center, Pune, India's largest science technology innovation incubator, as well as an independent advisor to the Longitude Prize UK. It's an utmost pleasure to have you, Dr. Dash. I welcome Professor Shubha Tole to the panel today. She is a professor at the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, Mumbai. Her research has made fundamental contributions to our understanding of the brain, development, and the mechanisms that control learning and memory. She is a recipient of several awards and accolades, like the Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Award, the National Women Bioscientist Award from the Department of Biotechnology, Government of India, and the Infosys Prize, to name a few. Our next panelist is Dr. Soumitra Pathare. Dr. Soumitra is a consultant psychiatrist and the director of Center for Mental Health, Law and Policy, Pune. Dr. Soumitra comes from an extensive experience in contributing to the WHO's mental health policy. He has also been instrumental in drafting India's new mental health law as part of the policy group of the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. He's also project director of SPIRIT, a NIMH-funded hub for suicide prevention in Southeast Asia. Welcome you to the panel, sir. Now I'll go through a quick run-through of the housekeeping rules for today's panel. The discussion today is divided into 2 rounds or sessions. In the first 45 minutes or so, we will be hearing from our panelists on the relevance of today's theme in the context of STIP 2020, followed by a round of question and answers coming from the general public who are watching the live stream today on YouTube. The event is live streamed on YouTube, and the hashtag for asking these questions is #AskStip2020Governance. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Over to you, Radhika.
All right. Thank you so much, Vanshika. So with this, now we open the first part of our panel, where I'll request our panelists to share their thoughts and perspective on science, technology, innovation, governance, and system interconnectedness, and how it is quite relevant to our upcoming new science, technology, innovation policy 2020. So firstly, I'll start with Ms. Deepanwita. So can we have your thoughts? Over to you, Ms. Deepanwita.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you indeed for organizing this panel today. And so I would start with why we are doing this policy. So there is an intent and a goal of and an aspiration on science and technology. And whether it's governance or whether it's interconnectedness, these are basically to see what kind of policies should be adopted for reaching the S&T goals or the S&T aspiration of the country. So various aspects of policies to reach a common goal or an aspiration of the country is important. And there I actually want to bring in the importance of interconnectedness. Why is it at the core of all kinds of policies? Because today, the problems are very complex, science is complex, and there is no way we can actually talk of working in silos and achieving any rational, aspirational goal of a country of the size of India. So if we have to really look at whether it's inclusiveness, whether it is global dominance in certain areas of science, whether it is the SDGs, each area, I think we really need to see how various organizational agencies that implement science policies, that deliver science, are connected. And when I'm saying they're connected, I'm talking of academia, industry, governance, and government at the center, government in the states, the local city councils, all of them, we are talking of looking at how these are interconnected. Of course, we need to look at national missions and national critical issues that we really need to solve, and their PPP modes have worked around the country. And we really need to adopt certain things like where industry and government sit together and come up with areas that are important. So these are mandate definitions we do. We solve grand challenges, because solving grand challenges for the country is very important. And there, I think adopting PPP mode of interconnectedness is important. Academia interconnectedness is most important. Clusters are very important, because we really need to look at regions and clusters of innovation, how do they survive? How do they enhance their value addition to the innovation index of the country? When we are working together, we are all aiming towards having India as maybe the top 10 most innovative countries in the world. Can we achieve this? I do not know what goals we are setting. We have to really discuss that. But only what we understand when we're talking of interconnectedness and governance is that our role is to have policies to enhance and reach these goals that we are setting. And I mentioned cluster, I mentioned state and central government working together. That we need to look at interconnectedness of interministerial interconnectedness. Because if the science and technology, the Ministry of Science and Technology is not working with the Ministry of Health or Ministry of Commerce, I think there will be a lot. And then I think we really need to see how the different ministries work together. How do we actually have a say in the global research and global not really the scientific knowledge in solving real huge grand challenges like the COVID pandemic we are talking about. So that is, I think, a key of having international bodies and international interconnectedness. So what I can do is I can stop here and hear other panelists, and then we will come back. Is that okay, Radhika?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much for putting your thoughts in such a explanatory manner. You have covered different types of interconnections that we would be targeting. And how a governance will play a very important role in connecting these different stakeholders, whether we are talking about the national ones or in international ones. So thank you once again, Ms. Deepanwita. So moving ahead, I would like to take an inputs from Dr. Satya Prakash, who is himself a technology policy leader, to give his insights on the subject. Over to you, Dr. Dash.
Okay, good evening, everyone. And as Deepanwita said, I think we just have to step back and see what's happening now. One thing, of course, everybody knows that we are going through so much of turbulence, globally. It's a global turbulence that the whole humanity is facing. So that's in a way, it came out of the blue, but in some sense, to do this exercise of science and technology policy and innovation during this time of turbulence is an amazing time, because when turbulence hit us, they really take the bare bones out. So, and then you really know what to build on that, right? Or what to build once the turbulence is gone. But again, before I quickly put my thoughts on the table, first, I think, there's a lot of appreciation for the PSA's office, Professor Vijay Raghavan, as well as the DST, Professor Ashutosh Sharma, and the whole team that you all are doing is, Radhika, Vanshika, Suresh, Shagun, and all others who are behind the screen as well. So great work. And in some way, this exactly meets a lot of checkboxes of how a science and technology policy should be done, because what we are doing now is very participatory, town halls. And I've been following quite a few of your blogs and other things and, these meetings. So it is participatory, it is open, people are allowed to put their thoughts. I think this itself is an amazing platform to talk about governance. That itself, when you talk about governance later, you are showing by example what you are doing. So hats off to all of you. The topic itself, right? So it's governance, systems, and interconnectedness. And I think Deepanwita nicely put together all the layers of it, or the nuances of it. But again, if you as an engineer, if you tease it apart, you look at governance and systems and interconnectedness, but you realize that unless you have systems in place, you cannot be talking about either the governance or the interconnectedness, right? And what kind of systems we already have is something that I think the panel, as well as the wider public, as well as the Office of PSA and all of you are helping, should be thinking about. What kind of adaptive systems we have to make, and then, as we know, systems are is made by interacting entities. So which are these entities? And Deepanwita alluded to those, whether it is regional or whether it is national or global. Then comes, once you have the system in place, or the kind of system you want to design and build or redesign, you have to think about, why do systems fossilize? Why do systems, what are the things that systems can utilize to stay nimble or renew themselves, right? These are the things we also need to think about. And then comes, to these two things, whether renewal or systems acceleration or system optimization, all of that is because of governance systems, right? And interconnectedness. And these two, when we talk about governance, the kind of policies we should have while for these interacting bodies to meet and discuss and share information. And interconnectedness, when we think about it, we can think in terms of both tangible way of interconnectedness or intangible way. And the frameworks of evaluation and monitoring is very important when we talk about systems, governance, as well as interconnectedness. So finally, it's outcomes. How do you define outcomes? What frameworks you need to use to define outcomes? And when the outcome should be done is something that maybe I'll touch upon later. And then I will end my first intervention by saying that, and there's no rocket science, even though we started by a countdown, is that there is, of course, no one-size-fits-all kind of solution, right? So the diversity of solutions have to be taken into account, and that is very contextual. With this, I'll stop here, and it's over to Radhika or Vanshika, whichever is taking this from me.
All right. So thank you so much, Dr. Satya, for giving us such a holistic view of the governance, about the regulatory mechanism, monitoring. So there are loads of things that we need to cover in this panel. And looking forward to take insights from all our panelists. Now I request Vanshika to take a lead and get our other two panelists on the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Radhika. So I'd now like to welcome Professor Shubha Tole. Professor, help us identify the pressing aspects of governing science, technology, and innovation that have a bearing on academia at large.
Okay, thank you. That's quite a daunting, overarching brief. I will try and make a couple of points. Okay. I'd like to begin from picking up what Deepanwita talked about a little bit, about our country's aspirations. Okay, we are all here because no matter how complicated and difficult the situation, we still dream and we aspire. And this is, in fact, our country's strength. We've never given up the ability to dream. Okay, that's our strength. Our dreams look to the future. Our aspirations look forward to the next few years, to the next decade, to the next few decades. But our processes and procedures with which these aspirations will play out, or on which these aspirations are utterly dependent to become realities, our processes are, I think, from the last century. One might even say they're from the dark ages. Okay, so this is the overall theme of my talk. We can make all the plans in the world, but if we actually have a way of executing them, I think we're just going to, throw good money after bad. We're not going to bang for our buck. I think Indian innovation is held back, not because of a lack of ideas, but because these ideas and the plans of talented young people, young students, junior faculty, are just stymied because of a lack of support, encouragement, and in enabling them to do their work. And what do I mean? We are a hierarchical society, okay? We seriously believe age automatically brings respectability. And just becoming senior earns you respect. And unfortunately, okay, I have nothing against being respected as an aging person myself. But unfortunately, the flip side of that is that we believe people need to earn said respect by aging. Okay, they need to, you're young, you're new, you're supposed to waste your time because your time is cheaper than the time of some, senior person. Kalao, any young person is pushed to kalao, I'll deal with it later. I think if we don't treat people, young students, junior faculty, like the leaders they are going to become, they're never going to become. Or when they do become leaders, by then their ability to dream is going to be stymied, and they are the ones who are going to carry forward the aspirations of the country. Okay, so I think we really need a deep look at our own social culture. Okay, where we need to ask ourselves, why are we as a society this way? That which is our strength. Our families are large. We live in joint families. We take care of our elders because they have given so much to us. All of that positive becomes a problem if it is brought into the professional space. And I think our culture is unable to separate a framework in personal life and a framework in professional life. In fact, this dichotomy was not obvious to me until I went to the US to train, and I realized that people use a completely different framework professionally and a different one personally, and you're supposed to separate the two. I don't think we internally understand that this is necessary. Okay, and because our society is like this, and like I said, this is a very good thing in our personal, in our culture and so on, because we don't have this professional approach to making things work. Okay, very, very nice and decent people end up not actually enabling science. For example, okay, I know that science administration people in finance at my own institute are very nice, wonderful people. Okay, anytime I ask for help, I've always got it, and I've been at my institute now 20 years. In fact, I've been able to identify a gap. Why is it very nice, very decent people who are doing their job are unable to actually help scientists or students, get procedures done? I think it's because we lack a clear definition of the goal. Okay, I think somehow our procedures and our administration has gotten into a loop where clearing the file from the table ends up becoming the goal, regardless of what actually happens down the road. Okay, and I'm making this very broad statement because I was shocked to realize how happy people in the accounts of section of TIFR were when I actually explained to them, well, you fill out all these forms, these UCs, these SCs. Finally, when I send them, the DBT finance people have all of these problems and it goes back and forth. So let's solve the problem at the beginning. And, all these years, nobody had actually communicated that them finishing their bit was not the end of the day, end of the goal. The goal was finally it had to pass the next step and the next step, and then the money had to come. Now, how does this affect science? I don't need to belabor the point. If a student is going to wait for their stipend, if a student is not going to get paid on time, okay, we may have all the schemes in the world, but you're going to have one frustrated young person who is never going to become realize their potential of being a scientist. And there goes the future innovation. Okay, so just as scientists have our report card, we have our evaluations and so on, I think we need to begin, before we make plans and before, we need to have a system-wide review where questions are asked as to how much has each unit facilitated research. What is the timeline of processing of whatever files it is, whatever, procedures are important, obviously, but what is the timeline? Is the end goal met? Okay, and failing these, okay, new initiatives are going to be stunted. And all of the interconnectedness we're going to talk about today is going to become a tangled mess of even more bureaucracy. Okay? I will end with emphasizing that our young people, young students and scientists are really the ones who we should be supporting and enabling. And any student fellowship that we generate, be it CSIR, be it whatever, DVTP, any student fellowship, any scheme that we have, schemes for women scientists, schemes for re-entry fellowships, any scheme, if it doesn't absolutely happen on the clock, okay, see, who are all these schemes for? Okay, who are fellowships for? They're for people, obviously, right? If people didn't need the money, okay, people who need these funds in order to support themselves while they do work are now dependent on these funds. And if they don't come for 6 months, for 1 year, you're going to put somebody in such terrible hardship. How are the country's aspirations going to play out? Okay, I mean, this kind of stress on our young people is abominable. It's not just our young people, it's our grants, it's the very support that we have. So regardless of where the money comes from, eventually if we don't have the procedure to administer it properly, how are we going to compete? How are we going to have the next? What we end up doing is we stunt the ideas that we bring to the table because we produce ideas that are doable regardless of the vagaries of the funding. So the disconnect is dramatic. And this problem has been solved. Okay, this problem has been solved by some agencies. For example, the Welcome DBT India Alliance, they manage grants wonderfully. Their funds come on time. Okay, the wheel does not have to be reinvented. If one thing could come out of the private sector getting into the funding and the support of research, if maybe we could bring in this kind of a professionalism to how this is administered, maybe that could be the biggest contribution. Maybe if all of student fellowships are actually administered privately, it's a way of sort of, how do you say it, funding and supporting and banking your money in the hands that are going to play out the country's future. What could be a better investment? So I will close here. with a summary statement that, it's more than clearing the file from the table. The lives of young people and their ideas need to be nurtured by evaluating the procedures with which we lay out and roll out any new scheme, any new idea, any innovation, any sentence. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you, Professor Tole. Thank you for so lucidly elaborating on breaking the silos of academic hierarchies and addressing the administrative loopholes. I guess we'll have to start closer home before you talk of a system interconnectedness right there in academia. Thank you for your thoughts there. I now invite Dr. Soumitra to the panel. Dr. Soumitra, you've been instrumental in enabling India's Mental Health Care Act passed by the Rajya Sabha in 2017. What are some aspects of science, technology, and innovation policies that have not been attended to in the policy drafting back in 2017, but over the course of time have emerged to be important and can be taken up through STIP2020? Over to you, sir.
I hope you can hear me now. I've just unmuted myself.
Yes,
thank
sir.
you for asking me to join this panel, and thank you to the office and to the organizers for having me here. It's an unusual thing. Mental health rarely gets represented at any science and technology discussion. So I'm extremely pleased that the PSA's office is actually recognizing the important role for mental health in this whole process. Just to pick up on what Professor Deepanwita said earlier, is that if we are looking at things like the SDGs, if we are looking at grand challenges, then mental health represents probably some of those. For those who are not aware, mental health, if you look at the SDGs, for example, or even if you look at DALY's, disability adjusted life years, and mental health contributes to close to around 1 out of 10 DALY's lost, and 1 out of around 15% of years lived with disability. So if you're going to address some of these issues, then mental health needs to be here. I was going to actually, it's a very hard act following Professor Tole. I think she made an extremely coherent and very specific interventions around what are the difficulties around it. And I will come back and touch upon some of the points that you made, Professor Tole. But before I do that, I just wanted to highlight 3 levels of interconnectedness where problems exist at the moment. The first is whenever we talk about public-private partnerships, unfortunately, not at the level, not at the top, but at the level where things get implemented, that has always translated into public, meaning the public sector, which is government-led in some sort of way, and private, meaning for-profit industry. And there's actually a large sector which we don't consider and do not bring into the conversations, which is the not-for-profit sector. And there's a large number of social entrepreneurs who exist in the country. They're not for-profit entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs who are building social models to deliver things, which we don't seem to bring in. And there are lots of examples that you are obviously aware of, and I could even give you if you ask for it later. And I think that interconnectedness between our technology missions and our technology parks, or all of our science and technology infrastructure with that not-for-profit sector has always been not so good. The not-for-profit sector also exists on the other side, on the academic side. You know, in mental health, some of the best research that has come out in the last decade has come out of not-for-profit sector-run academic or research organizations in this country, not necessarily the public sector, but the third sector, if you can call it. So I think that is one thing that when we are talking about public-private partnerships, we need to really bring them in far more than we've done up to now. The second interconnectedness which creates a problem is the interconnectedness with government. And I speak as somebody who works on the policy side, but who also works on the research side, and who also works in scaling up and prototyping services which go to scale. So looking at, I come at it from 3 different angles, and I work with different bits of the government for different parts of these activities. And it's very interesting, but what was mentioned earlier by Professor Deepanwita, which is interconnectedness within government is a problem, and interconnectedness between governments is a problem. And then the bigger problem is getting the whole of government to actually interconnect with academic institutions as well as with not-for-profit sector. And it's very difficult because a lot of the health innovations require governments, different departments in the government to collaborate together. And we find that extremely challenging. I find it extremely challenging when we have an innovation which can be scaled up and you have to work across governments. I'll give you an example. If I have an innovation which will work for prevention, which is known to be effective but needs to be delivered in schools, then trying to get the health ministry and to get the education sector to work together is a challenge. You know the amount of energy that is spent in trying to get them to all sing from the same hymn sheet becomes a huge challenge. And researchers get completely tired out of that. I mean, it's tiring, you give up. You're also running out of your grant. Your clock starts to tick and you're running out of your grant. You want to get things done, and you can't just be waiting for 9 months or 12 months waiting for a permission to come through from some government office which is going to say, yeah, please start doing this. And so then research gets affected there. And the third interconnectedness, which does not seem to happen very well, is somehow science and technology in our country has not also included social science. And I think a lot of the health problems in this country cannot be addressed unless we have a good interconnectedness between biological, physical sciences and social sciences. Our problems are not going to be solved purely by biology. And so if we are going to have an interconnectedness, and if you're talking about science and technology policy, then how do we incorporate the social sciences and the academic work from social sciences, which is required? I mean, a lot of give you an example, a lot of the HIV related work in prevention of HIV required behavioral sciences to be there. You needed to understand the social ecology in which, say, HIV infections were happening in certain sections of the population. And unless we bring social sciences actively into the science and technology framework, then that becomes a problem. Again, there you have, so, there are silos within our government system. There is a social science silo and there is a technology, biological science silo, and getting them to interact together is actually another interconnectedness problem, which I think needs to be addressed. And I think maybe these are things we can discuss over time. To kind of touch upon what Professor Tole said, I think I just wanted to make 3 points there. First of all, I think India Alliance, I should make a declaration of, I don't know, conflict of interest. I do serve on one of their committees for public health. So you might think that I will praise India Alliance, but the fact of the matter is that what Professor Tole said was completely true. India Alliance has a system of grant governance, grant delivery, which is excellent. It's world class. It functions, and it actually keeps science and academia going very well. And it's something that could be adopted by everybody. All of the funding agencies could actually just literally adopt the thing that India Alliance is doing perfectly for everybody. I think that is really needs to be said. I'm saying this because I'm currently breaking my head on another funder who I shall not name, a government funder, where we are now in a process of in the next 7 days giving notice to our staff and shutting down a project which is a 5-year funded project after 2 years, because I cannot get the funder to even reply to emails saying,
name them.
No, I'm not going to name them. I still have to continue to work with them. But just getting them to even acknowledge an email to say, look, we are late, we will do it. I can, my institution will say, look, we're happy to give you a loan to keep going, but we need something from them saying they're processing it, they're doing something about it. Nothing. It's radio silence. Emails don't get answered. Phone calls don't get answered. I mean, what are we supposed to do? And interestingly, this is a grant in which the funder is part of an international consortium, and there are other international partners. And the international consortiums are writing to the funder saying, do something. I'm just giving you an example of the chaos that it creates and the amount of time that young people. I have a young researcher who wants to keep the project going, has a lot of great ideas. It's easy to become cynical and lose interest because you're spending a large amount of your time just chasing up. The word she used was banging against a wall. It's like the mail just disappear into ether. You don't even get a reply saying we will reply or nothing of that sort. And I think that is really a real problem. So they spend a lot of, we've become so procedurally bound that procedures have become an end in itself rather than a means to an end. It does not matter whether you produce rubbish. As long as you get through the procedures and do everything right, then you've done a project. It's like the outcomes have become irrelevant. We focused on procedures and outputs, outcomes. And I think really the policy needs to look at how can we pivot away from outputs to outcomes. Because that's just not happening. And finally, I think one of the, I would like to stop here by saying one of the main things is it needs to be said. It's an old saying, but it needs to be said that, are men made for rules or rules made for men? I mean, we need to decide which, and I don't use men in a gendered sense, but, what is what for? At the moment, it seems to me that rules are not being made for men. Men have to be made for rules, and that's a real problem. So it kills innovation, it kills any kind of attitude to do things, and it's very difficult to retain young talent and encourage them not to stay back and do world-class stuff if they kind of see you struggling, they themselves are struggling. It is extremely challenging for all of us to do that. So, the STIP policy really needs to focus on the human resources. At the end of the day, innovation is about ideas. Innovation is about doing things differently. Innovation is not about doing the same thing. And that does not seem to get across to a lot of the work that we do. I'll stop here. I'm sorry if I've kind of ruffled feathers and hurt people about something, but I think it needs to be said somewhere in some time. Thank you. Over to you, Vanshika.
No, so in fact, we appreciate that you actually brought and voiced all these opinions and only help us make the policy so much better by addressing the real practical roadblocks of innovation. So thank you for sharing your experience, sir. And now I would invite Radhika to take over to the next segment.
So we thank you all for your detailed insight to the theme of today's panel. And I'm really excited the way the core area of how a social science subject, how researchers are facing problems, can be addressed to the overall science, technology, innovation, governance. If students are not happy, if researchers are not happy, how can we expect them to do a better research? How we expect them to be leaders in innovation? So a very good aspect that Professor Tole and Dr. Soumitra you have shared. And so taking a note from here, so now we open our session for our audience. So we would be taking questions from the audience. I will again repeat audience to put their questions in comment box using hashtag #STIP2020 governance. So they can post their questions and comments on other social media platforms. We are open at Facebook, we are open at Instagram, we are open at Science Policy Forum as well. So with this, now I open our forum for the questions. So my first question is related to the existing public-private partnership models for R&D in India. So there are a number of successful models that are working on. They have several reports. One of the Center for Policy Research at Punjab University, they have compiled beautifully different kinds of models that come under government industry models, government academia industry model, then directly academia industry model. So here my question goes to Ms. Deepanwita. So what do you think, how STI governance can strengthen these models in India? Over to you, Ms. Deepanwita.
Thank you, Radhika. Yeah, governance. Just we heard Shubha and Soumitra. Governance is at the core of any policy. Whether we are talking of PPPs, we are talking of successful models. Anything that is successful is because of the policies that guide how these will be implemented. So the governance. And it was so eloquently mentioned that if we are unable to perform what we are supposed to perform, like procedures, Soumitra mentioned that procedures are becoming the end goal, and it is not a means to an end. And I thought is absolutely so. The policies that we put in, the governance policies, should be around how we facilitate outcomes to happen when we are talking of a PPP. When we are talking of a PPP, we are talking of at least two entities. Because the moment we are saying at least a private sector and a government sector, or there's also an academic sector, and there are various models, as you said. So their frameworks of working are different. Private sector industry works with a different kind of mindset, with a different kind of objective. Government has a different kind of objective. Academia is governed by different sets of rules and policies. If we cannot spell out what it should be when we are coming for an engagement, and the document, the engagement document and the process, if it's not lucid, if it's not transparent, if it's not clearly indicated, there will be elements of discontent and dispute later, and that will actually slow down. What happens in India is we have never learned how to say no. We would say, we will try. We will try actually means, sorry, I'm not doing it. But we've been trained not to say, sorry, I'm not going to do it because this does not make sense. We would always say, okay, let me try. So we're always trying to be good, and that's absolutely not helpful. Because
sorry, may I interject here? God forbid they know, the person remembers and takes it amiss personally and hates you forever, rather than respecting the fact that you said it up We're not issue-based in our interactions.
Because we are trying to solve problems. We have a science mind frame, and so if we are trying to solve any issue, we have to be able to discuss at the rational level as grown-up adults. We may differ, but ultimately the objective is to make things happen and push things towards certain goals. And I think, so governance is at the core, Radhika. I'll stop at this and we can have the, because I have a lot of examples where PPPs are not working and the reasons for that, but we can do it at a later date maybe.
Thank you, Tata, for rightly explaining what we require for working of a public-private partnership in a country like India. So taking a note from there, as I just briefly interacted with Dr. Satya yesterday, so he mentioned about some of the fabulous global models of PPP. So how relevant these models can be for an Indian scenario? We have one question coming from YouTube also. Ms. Mamta has asked, so how these excellent international models of governance and system interconnectedness. We have models such as industry, university cooperation centers of USA, CIBR program, on which definitely the CIBR program of BIRAC was set up. The Fraunhofer Institute, catapults there. So how well they can be adopted in an Indian scenario? So Dr. Dash, over to you.
Okay, this was such an amazing last half an hour, I think, to hear Soumitra, Deepanwita, and Shubha. Sorry, I'm taking your first names. I think I only know Deepanwita personally for the last 10 years. There are two things to this. And the core of, let me just address what has happened in the last half an hour. I think the pain of all of us is that how on earth in a country of 1.5 billion is able to not make a pothole-free road, but is able to make send Chandrayaan to moon, right? So, and why on earth we can't address this problem? I mean, this is actually a problem. The idea about why it's not working, I think both Shubha and Soumitra did tease it apart very well, in a sense that what is really happening in the innards of the of the system. Maybe the system hasn't been responsive, or maybe it's it's too much pressurized itself in terms of showing numbers. Maybe it's all about humility and understanding that this is the money that the system has. The system is actually a gatekeeper, right? That's it, gatekeeper. When I used to work in public agencies, I think the idea has to be that if you are working in a private industry, you say that the private industry is working to increase shareholder value, right? And that's the whole thing about private industry. In the public industry, I think it has to be inculcated that they are also working for the shareholder value. And here the shareholders are all citizens of the country. And so there is really not difference in terms of the attitude to how do you work. And it's also about being catalytic, or trying to solve a problem. That's my two bits on it. And the other thing is we run away, and I think Deepanwita mentioned this very nicely. We do not define boundary conditions. We do not have documentation, right? We do not say there is an agency, for example, globally, that it's, if you apply for your regulatory, if you develop something and you apply to them, they say that in 30 days, if you don't hear back from us, then you can move ahead with that product. What it also means is that on the 29th day, if they send a reply back, it is detailed. It is not on the 29th day, the response is not that, oh, we have noticed your application and thank you very much, you will hear from us. I think that process integration to make a nimble system has to be inculcated within, within our systems that we have. I'm just recently, I've moved to Germany, and I'm based in Berlin. Not that I know this system well that much, but and also I'm not saying that every system globally that works can be replicated in India. I think we can also build our own system that are nimble, right, and that are also grounded on facts. But if you look at Fraunhofer's, I just, I know a couple of places that I read about Fraunhofer, 1949, 69 institutes. They work across 10,000 projects. And interestingly, I was reading a public statement and it said, we worked from the local bakery to the global MNCs. And that also exactly happened to me. So I'll just give a personal anecdote. After I moved out from the lab and I worked in a fabulous place, and here I'm batting for that place, it's called IFM, Institute for Manufacturing, in Cambridge. And there they looked at the manufacturing as a whole process from ideation to actually production and commercialization. And here I was a biologist amongst not just engineers or manufacturers, but to Soumitra's point, there were political scientists, there were sociologists, there were economists, all looking at one problem and seeing it from different directions, right? So how can we build those, again, and that was a beautiful place. So how can we build such systems here in India? I'm not saying that they are not there. If they are there, how can we transplant those systems and really scale it up across India? Let me give a couple of examples in terms of PPP. I actually won't spend on global models because if you do a little bit of Google Baba will give you all the answers about global models and things like that. And so I've already mentioned Fraunhofer. You can look into how Taiwan, such a small island country, has built this amazing global semiconductor industry, right? And there's you can really go to the nerve of it, which is the ITRI institute. But if you look at what I started by saying, the PPP model, we are able to send things to moon, but we're not able to build a proper road next to my house in the street. But there have been models. I mean, if I do not know, I mean, ISRO, for example, opened up a couple of days back, and it was a fantastic thing to see. I wonder what, if our management consultants or anybody who has looked into how ISRO's network is, how do they work and how are they able to send things in such a precise manner? What's the network of the value chain? If you look at even smaller places like, 20 years back, this anecdote came out a couple of days back. I was talking to an industry person who is in the medtech industry, and he said, Satya, look at how GE and Bell, Bharat Electronic Systems, they came together 20 years back in 97. And they are, building products that are not just relevant for our country, but for global markets as well. And here is a PSU working with GE. There is also Bharat Electronics Limited, partnerships with Thales system, and this is for radar and other things. So all I'm trying to say is that can we look at our systems that have worked? We talk about Amul as a benchmark for our homegrown industry. So let's look at some of our industry academia partnerships within India. Let's have an honest conversation like we are having here. And to the point, this is a great example of what is happening. It doesn't matter how many people are participating or not participating. The very fact that the PSA office is conducting this, where people like Shubha, Soumitra, Deepanwita, and us, all of us can really speak openly, is definitely a change that is for the positive, right? And how can we basically suffuse this across different layers of government? I mean, we are talking about central government. Think about state governments and the moribund systems that they have, right? So I started by saying we can talk about systems, governance, all of that, but somebody should look into systems senescence, right? And in some way letting some systems fade away, because you cannot keep a lot of systems on kind of, I'm sorry to use this term now, on ventilation for too long, right? You've got to let go of some systems to build new systems. So and so in terms of models, yes, there is Fraunhofer, there is ITRI, there is what we could do, and I'm sure somebody has done it, amongst you, is that can we, in the continuum, basic science, in the middle, somebody doing half basics, half applied, and on the right, complete applied sciences. Can we put our institutions on this scale and see who is doing what, number one. Number two, there is, I come from the universe that each of these categories have to be supported deep and very long. In the drumbeat of applied sciences, let's not forget basic science as well, right? Because that's really the rainforest that's going to give us. And each of these categories will have its own framework that can be assessed, right? So, and let's look at the global frameworks that Fraunhofer uses. We have also here in this country now that I've been here for a couple of months, there's the Max Planck Institute and all of that. We have similar such systems in India. Nobody can deny that we have amazing centers for excellence. How can we take those lessons and do that in the tier 2, tier 3 institution is something that needs to be mentioned. Here is something, Radhika, I don't know that I'm addressing your question, but the fundamental part of the question also is the kind of education system we have. I come from a very tiny part of Odisha called Sambalpur. And the only reason I could get a trigger or pivoting in my career was a fellowship from a Jawaharlal JNCSR, summer fellowship that led me to meet, Veronica in TIFR 35 years back, right? That was a transformational thing. So as a part of PPP, there are different kind of frameworks and management that you can do. In the end, as both Soumitra as well as Shubha are saying, in the end it's about nimbleness. In the end it's about small things like good fellowship program. Why can't a faculty go and take a sabbatical and go into an industry, or vice versa? Why can't an industry person go in? Why can a government person step out and take a 2-year sabbatical somewhere and then go back to the government systems? You can say, hey, there is conflict of interest and all of that. Yes, of course there are conflict of interest. In life, there is always conflict of interest. But therefore, it comes to the first part. You've got to document everything. If there is conflict of interest, how do you navigate it? What are the transparency measures? All of that needs to be put on paper is something that I want to say. And one last point, again to the wonderful comment that Soumitra gave, is about social sciences and it not being part of our science and technology thinking, right? We are somehow as a country, which we should be proud of. We are very happy about Excel spreadsheets, quantitative data, doing modeling out of it. That's great. But a whole lot of things is also about qualitative things, right? So qualitative research has to be also put in place, even within our science institutes, right? And the nuances of it has to be taught to our scientific graduates as well. That's one thing. Because in the end, somebody told me once, and a known fact, that a cola company can reach to the remotest kashba of our country, but we still can't deliver healthcare at that village, right? So, and so what are the principles can we learn from the cola company that you can get from the middle of Kudalur in some, you know, in some remote pawn shop and can buy a Coke? But that place may not have the vaccination numbers that we would like to see. So, okay, it's quite a haphazard answer, but three things. One is really look at small little things. We can say little things like fellowship programs, like, you know, open up the system, make the system very porous, have people come in, spend a couple of years with you. There are many people who are not driven by money. They just want to experience and play the integrative role. You know, find those half a dozen, 2 dozen, 10,000 people who can be in TIFR for 2 years, or then go and you know, work somewhere in the middle of somewhere, if that's what it is. Then come or work in industry or do road mapping exercises. This kind of systems feeding onto each other, you know, is something that we need to do. It's very from the distance it might seem very chaotic, very noisy. But when you look at it, actually, those redundancy in the system actually make it very stable and very nimble. System nimbleness doesn't mean that it shouldn't have rules and processes. You know, rules, system is slow because of people, not because of you know, and I think that's Soumitra really teased it about very nicely, and so did Shubha. So all systems are slow because of people. In the system, not because of the rules. I mean, and the rules are all, you know, also adaptive in nature. So when I look back at it over the last 10, 12 years of my, you know, my life in you know, in the liminal way, in the ecotone area between industry, between government and non-profit. You know, I worked at each of these places. It's just there are good people in all the systems. It's just that system lethargy is not because of 80% of people. It's because of 5% of people. I'll stop there.
Right, Dr. Satya. So we all are like rightly on the page that to address these science, technology, and innovation, to strengthen India in that term, we first need to target the core of our system, that is research. So what problem once we are facing that full-time equivalent number of researchers per million, India is lacking a lot. And I, like Dr. Soumitra and Professor Tole, you have rightly targeted that thing, that how we need to increase that FTE. So if we need to increase that full-time equivalence, we need to increase the research fellowship mechanisms. We need to do it timely. Like when I was doing my research, I faced similar problems. I'm sure these problems are being there. But that is why we are having this consultation that would be rightly addressed into our new policy, in which we will be taking these things very seriously into consideration. So moving ahead, changing a little bit track now, I'll request Vanshika to take over and to cover other aspects of STI governance. Over to you, Vanshika.
Thank you, Radhika. I'd now like to sort of steer our conversation to what really holds the reins to all that we've talked about until now, that is funding management, right? So let's start with you, Professor Tole. We'd like to know how financial administration and grants management can be made more robust through STIP 2020 with regards to, say, grant disbursal and networking among funding agencies. So your thoughts on that?
Okay, thank you. No, my answer to this is going to be absolutely, I don't know, scientific. I don't have the data to give you an answer. I do not know what the timelines are, at which desk what stops. Okay, we all have discussed how emails go into a black hole, how, you know, papers, eventually something comes out. I do not have the data, a spreadsheet of all the grants, all the steps it goes through, all the problems, why it goes back, how many days it sits at each, you know. I'm on the STI governance group, and I made these points there. And as an example, I shared a spreadsheet that I made at TIFR, where I have newly taken over as Dean of Graduate Studies. Okay, DIFR has many centers. Okay, we have 6 centers: Hyderabad, Bangalore, Pune, and we have PhD students everywhere. And each has an academic office, but the university cell central is in Mumbai. Now, there was a perception that things were slow, okay, and the university cell was continuously mired in phone calls where the various academic officers would ask, what's the stage, what's the stage? Now, a PhD thesis is going to have delays because, an examiner is going to take the time they're going to take. But where is the thesis at? Immediately, our very, very able data management system led by a wonderful person, Nihita Goyal, I'd like to acknowledge her and her team. They're setting up a system where the way you check out what stage it is at, a student will be able to tell what stage their thesis is at. But while that comes into place, within a month of taking over, I had a Google Sheet where there were columns, and every administrative office in every center can access this Google Sheet. And we basically have time of submission of synopsis, has the guide sent a potential list of examiners, has an examiner been chosen, have the examiners been contacted? I'm giving you these details because we need these details in what happens to our financial management of our grants. Okay, so it turned out, for example, that the biggest bottleneck was that the guides were not sending a list of potential examiners because they thought until the thesis is ready, why you need the examiners? So, you could identify whereas, you need the examiners when the synopsis is submitted. So the synopsis goes to a potential examiner. Will you agree to examine? All that process takes a month. So if the guide is going to be, and this was not available to us before, but the spreadsheet showed us exactly where which delay happened. If we only had transparency of what is happening to each system, we can solve it. I mean, this is not, rocket science, though as the point was being made, we're able to launch rockets very well. So I don't have the data to answer this, okay? But if you don't mind, I would like to take this question into a slightly different space. What can we do besides improving our grant procedures to stimulate Indian science, okay? I have one big lacuna I'd like to highlight. It is that Indian government-funded grants, most of them, 99% of them, do not have a foreign travel budget head. That head doesn't exist, okay? Only prestigious fellowships like the Swarna Jayanti allow foreign travel. Regular grants do not. It is almost as if we're living in the ages where, a foreign trip is like a junket which, political babus take, and that money has to be curtailed. Now, science is a global adventure, okay? If you cannot meet colleagues who are doing work in related fields, if you cannot interact, if you cannot stimulate each other, if you cannot know where your competitors are, if you do not showcase your science to the rest of the world saying, we are doing this, okay? I've heard stories from TIFR where reviewers refused to believe that such and such analysis was possible in India because they had never heard the person give a talk about it. So they refused to believe that such equipment existed in India. This was, many decades ago. But if we do not consider foreign travel, if we remove this idea that foreign travel is this ultra special thing, I mean, students from, say, Israel have continuous foreign exchange with the rest of Europe. Okay, if we don't send our students out from the youngest stages, okay, if they don't go out to meetings and realize they are part of a huge human enterprise that is worldwide, that is international, we're always going to feel that, this is our work and those people there have done something. You hear a student present a journal club, they have shown this, they have shown that. Who's they? They mean somebody outside, your space. You have this word in every language. Okay, in Marathi, te lok. Okay, I don't know, there is, every language has this them, an unspecified nebulous them, because only your little microcosm. This has to be broken. This has to be broken. So if there is something that the private sector can actually provide to Indian science and technology, that is to just open up the minds via a funding pipeline that allows people to interact and do projects abroad and visit to conferences abroad and basically make the whole thing a global community. Back to you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you for your thoughts. So my next question would now be to Dr. Soumitra. Sir, in what capacity can STIP 2020 increase engagement of young science enthusiasts in scientific and technical innovations? Can mentor-mentee liaisons and early funding support that we earlier touched upon, will they, and how can they be made a part of the policy framework to sort of catch people while they're young? So your thoughts on that, sir?
I might sound like a heretic here and say that, look, really it is not so much about the funding and the money, but about actually the dispersal of that money. It's no point having, we've allocated 200 crores for this. Well, if the 200 crores can't get out without having pain worth 400 crores, then that 200 crores is of no use to anybody. So really, it's not about that packet that everyone announces. I think the real issue, and this touches about at every level, is that trickle down governance is not working. Okay. And the fundamental problem the science and technology sector faces is lack of governance, and poor governance. And what I mean by trickle down governance is that the gap between intention and actual practice is huge. So if I talk to the PSA's office, the intentions are very clear. Now, I know the PSA's office can't come and actually do the practice, but the gap between what the PSA's office might have as intentions and translating those intentions into practice on the ground, when my researcher has to deal with a section officer in a government who's going to give out that check, that governance and we are hoping that it will trickle down. We are hoping that the intentions will trickle down into good governance at the bottom end. And that is just not happening. So if the science and technology policy can do anything, is actually improve that trickle down from the intention at the top level to the coal face end, which is what most of, say, Professor Tole's students would face, or my researchers would face, that coal face, the people whom they have to interact with on a day-to-day basis. And if you can do that last mile change, then that will make a huge difference. And secondly, one of the things that our systems need to really do is transparency. There's transparency is probably the best disinfectant to a lot of problems. And I do not know why we do not adopt transparency at all levels. I think even our funding systems, the STIP process, I think governance needs to be transparent. Unfortunately, in our country, we've also created a situation where errors of omission are not punished. Errors of commission are punished. And so you've created a system where as long as you don't commit a mistake, you're fine. Omit to do anything at all, but you can't be hauled up for that. And I think that needs to change. So you find that this whole thing of people not doing anything at all, because, well, if I don't do anything, you can't pull me up for a mistake. But if I do something, then I might do it wrong. And so, that whole governance system needs to change, that errors of omission actually are sometimes far more harmful than errors of commission are. And the fact is that if all of us do something, we are going to make mistakes. But if you create a situation where you say you shouldn't make mistakes, then what you get is nobody does anything, because making a mistake is a crime. So I think that needs to happen. And the other thing is that we talk about industry partnership. For many of us in the public health sector, we have a single buyer. There is no industry buying our services. Okay, if I'm going to do if I'm a public health researcher who's trying to change the public health system, my single buyer is government. So if I have an innovation which will change the system, the public healthcare system, that there's only one buyer, a state government or a central government. The problem is our governments don't even know how to buy those services, don't even know how to incorporate the innovation in that. They're used to saying, oh, you want me to buy 20 X-ray machines or 100 MRIs? They understand that. You want me to put up a building? They understand that. If I come and say, I have got an innovation which, if you change your system in this way, will reach 100 more people, they say, oh, well, that innovation we can't incorporate. That is not something we can. Why don't you give me something I could just purchase and put in place? And I think that our governments refuse to buy system innovations. And very often the biggest solutions or the largest bang for the buck solution are going to be system innovations rather than just a technology innovation. And a system innovation is also a technology innovation. I think we need to start thinking that way. Technology does not mean a product or a chemical or a reagent or a goods, some good. A system innovation can be a technology innovation, and somehow governments need to start to understand that technology innovation includes that kind of stuff. So I'll stop here. I mean, just throwing these things for people to think about, not saying that I have any answers. But I think if we can at least ask these questions, we might find these answers. Over to you, Radhika, Vanshika. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. As you rightly said, that industry and interconnect should be there. So if we develop some technology, there should be an industry buyers. But how can we target that? That is working well in IITs. They're working in IIC, some of the premier institutes. So India has come up with the fabulous models of incubators. They have come up with science parks. These are all science, technology, and innovation facilitators. They are the enablers. And I hope so. This pattern of having incubators, such an activated, integrated platforms that they have created, this will definitely change the scenario. So we'll come to the startup ecosystem in India. That is one of the most promising area that science, technology, and innovation is coming up in India. Before that, covering the social science aspect, I'll request Vanshika to have a little bit of thoughts from you all on how a woman participation in science, technology, innovation be targeted by the STI governance as well. So over to you, Vanshika. You just pose your question.
Sure.
Vanshika, I think Deepanwita was trying to, was waving. She wanted to get in and make a comment at some point. Sorry to interrupt you.
Not at all, sir. I was going to bring her in at this point.
Deepanwita, as you are leading the Knowledge Park, we are definitely giving you a good time for discussing about how an industry startup connect should be there and how startups should be roped back into the economy of India.
Radhika, you got me absolutely right, because I wanted to bring in, when you're talking of innovation, the startups. And you understood from my expression. Thanks. Yeah. So no, I'll wait for by.
Yeah. After our women participation being addressed by STI governance, we'll come back to our full-fledged startup topic then. All right, over to you, Vanshika.
Mr. Deepanwita can definitely start with that aspect as well. Like, what does she think in aspects of science, technology, and innovation? How can women representation be more strengthened?
I come from the industry side. I had asked why I was with ICICI for a long time. In fact, the Knowledge Park that I represent was set up by ICICI. Then, of course, it is now with an independent trust, but initially set up by ICICI by Mr. Narayanan Vagul, who is the chairman of ICICI at that point of time. And I asked once Mr. Vagul, how come there are so many women in the senior management and middle management in ICICI? He said, Deepanwita, because we believe in merit and not gender. Because when we do interviews, we look at merit. And I think if we can strictly go by merit, we will have more women, because there are so many biases that act when we are kind of trying to employ women, and there are not enough role models. Shubha is a role model. We have to bring her and into discussions much more. So we all have a very important role to play, Shubha, because I think we need to put role models in place to say, if I can do it, you can do it too. And that has to be told, because I remember INSEAD had done a report with about maybe a lot, I don't remember the number, maybe more than 1,000 companies, many of them Fortune 500. And the question was asked is, where are women lacking? And after a detailed study, it was, the report is called the vision thing. So in everything else, women are found to be equal, and I'm talking of the corporate life, equal or better in various aspects, except where they really did not make it was visioning. And when you went back and say, why is that women are not in the leadership positions in terms of putting vision? Because one thing that came out is vision is about telling about a dream, is not about, and women believe in only spelling out things that they think is going to work. They do not, it's about, for corporates, it's about selling a dream. And women actually do not feel very comfortable selling a dream that they do not completely believe can be delivered. So there is a hesitance. So that is an aspect that was found out. And this is not a very new report, it's quite an old report. And the other thing was, typically, the governance that women do is actually very consultative. They would try and say that, what do you think? And then we adopt. There's a we there all the time. And when you say we, then it's not your vision. It's not the CEO's vision that comes in. It becomes a company's vision. It becomes everyone's vision. So women are found to be invisible in visioning. And I think we have to bring in that role and say, we are the role models, we have the part of vision. So it is about giving the confidence to people to say, yes, if we can do, you can do it too. And I think constantly that has to be infused. And it is growing. In the startup world, I'm seeing more women coming in. And I think this has to increase for sure. I think Shubha has a point to make. Shubha, please.
So please complete. I would like to add to your theme after you complete.
Yeah. No. So as I said that, yes, this is a very important aspect, because if we are the 50% of the world, without us, the science and technology policy is incomplete. Without having enough participation from women, whatever it is, it's not an inclusive policy, and no inclusive policy can give rise to a development of a nation as big as India. So we really need the participation of a very large number of women. When I'm saying women leaders, I'm not talking of women in the industry or corporate leaders. I'm talking of academia. I'm talking of social scientists. I'm talking of all fields of areas and disciplines that we need to. But at the same time, we must not forget are not the same. There are discriminations. There are reasons for women not to be able to do, especially when we are talking of science and technology. Science and technology, representation of women alone. A lot of women fear math. All these are conceptions and perceptions, I would say, that need to be broken. And also, I think the policy has to have a very well stated purpose to have this. If we do not understand the purpose, it will not be realized, because it has to be inculcated, told to people that this is the reason we want it. It is not nebulous that we are doing something good. Women don't need to be told that we're trying to do something good for you, so a little bit of this for you. That's not needed. We are all equal. But there has to be a stated purpose to say why science and technology policy with women engagement would actually bring a better India. I think connecting to the aspiration of India and bringing in women in science will be important. That's from me now.
Yeah, Professor, your deep insights right now.
Tole, you wanted to say something?
Oh yeah, may I? Is there time?
Please, sure.
Thank you, Deepanwita. You touched upon a topic near and dear to, I think, many of our hearts. It's sort of allowed me to connect some ideas that I've been thinking about for a while. I think in order to truly encourage women to be part of the visioning, in their careers, I think we have to catch them young. And I think young means 12 years old. Okay, and I'll tell you why. I think 10 to 12 years is probably the age, and maybe all the women hearing me will resonate with this, and the men hearing me will say, huh, really? I think 10 to 12 years old is the age at which our wonderful society and culture, which is so strong in so many ways, it begins to imbue a girl child with the idea that there are many things she has to consider before she plans her dreams. I don't believe men ever get told this. Paul, I was invited as a chief at my alma mater, St. Xavier's College once, and I was to speak to 11th and 12th standard students, and I made, all the young men stand up and answer this, and then the young women stand up. And basically, I posed this question, I said, to the young men, well, I'm sure hopes and so maybe you don't know what you want to do later in life. If you think that, whatever the future is, who knows exactly, I'll figure it out. If you're in this, I'll figure it out kind of state of mind, then sit down. And, if you're not sure this and that, remain standing. And of course, most of the boys sat down because that's reasonable, right? You don't know your future, but if you're reasonably happy and well balanced and so on, you'll figure it out. You ask this of women. The women all remain standing because a girl aged 10 and 12 is already told she doesn't have the ability to say, Dekha jayega, I'll figure it out. Because she's already programmed with the idea that, I believe in, you should study, you should this and you should that. There's a but. But it can't be at the expense of your family. And there is always this first, there's an idea that you're not going to be worthwhile if you're not married. Marriage and children make a woman worthwhile and complete. And if you don't go that route, you're basically kya hua. Nobody ever asks a guy kya hua, Okay, that's in and of itself. And let's not even get into the LGBTQ space. I'm really sorry, that's a space I can't address right now, but I acknowledge that it's a huge, huge lacuna. But what happens? A girl learns to pre-compromise her dreams. Okay? Compromise your ambitions because you're programmed with the idea that you're going to have to. You don't know where you're going to live, with whom you're going to live, what the family constraints will be, what you'll be allowed to do, even in the most progressive of cases, okay? And after this pre-programming, okay, comes the actual, sort of helping young people find partners in life, okay? Our institution of the arranged marriage, I know it's done in a modern way where people, basically expand the choice set from which they can choose. Many of my extended family cousins have found their partners this way. They're very happy. How do we set this up as a society? Okay, we program it so that the woman is lesser than the man in every way. She's got to be a little shorter. Okay, I mean, she can never ever be taller than the guy. She's got to be a little less qualified. MSc ladki, PhD ladka is okay. The reverse, oh my God. In fact, if you do a PhD, how will you ever get married is a question that asked. Okay. She has to be younger, a little younger. So what is all this setting up? It's setting up so that her job is always going to be the lesser paid and the lesser stable, because with time and age and seniority comes a more stable and senior job. Naturally, she's not going to know which city she lives in, because if you have to decide which city to move to, you're going to choose based on the more stable job and the higher income. Okay, we set all this up so that there is less conflict in the family. We set this up so that there is a harmonious household. Okay, she's always lesser and inferior. She's always looking up to the guy physically because he's taller. Remember, 2 inches taller. The whole deal is that, at the wedding reception, people have to say, kitna acha joda dikhta. That matching has to be there. And at the end of all this, you've set up this woman to be always the one who compromises in the interests of family harmony. And then you complain she isn't part of your visioning exercises. Okay, I mean, you see, we do this to our women. Very few women escape this. Very few women survive this. I think if we selected young girls before programming sets in, and if our, the new version of the National Talent Scholarship basically ensured that should they find a position for their PhD or their undergraduate, they will be thoroughly funded and they don't have to depend on anybody. Maybe more women will not compromise their age of 10. Okay, this is what we do to our girls at the age of 10, and then we try and fix the problem down the road. It's just much too late. I'm sorry, I took a lot of time, but I believe there is a wrong connection. Thank you.
No, your thoughts actually take me back to one of our earlier panels that was on equity and inclusion. And there was a very pertinent point that was raised there that for women to be retained in academia or even, get initiated in academia, we have to look beyond the surface level roadblocks. Say, for example, giving maternity leave or things of those kinds. So what you really put across to us was definitely on those lines and sort of took the conversation forward and we found some answers to that. So I'd invite Professor Dr. Soumitra now to give his comments on this theme.
Yeah, I just wanted to carry forward from what Deepanwita said and also what Professor Tole was saying, that I think if I can get you to widen this from a policy perspective and from a governance perspective, can we widen it and say, okay, what are we going to do to increase diversity in our science and technology space? Because diversity is not just gender diversity. Unfortunately, science and technology spaces, as it stands currently, is very male, which is predominantly male. It's predominantly from a very specific urban class, and it's also from a predominantly and particularly caste. I mean, these are diversity issues we haven't addressed in science. So gender needs to be addressed as part of that diversity, and to understand that there are intersectoralities in this. If we address all of the diversities, then we'll miss out the intersectorality. We can't be addressing gender on its own without, say, addressing regional issues, without addressing class, without addressing caste, without addressing what Professor Tole brought up. For example, sexual diversity. Gender is only one part of it. So I think what the policy needs to look at is actually a much more broader than just gender. It needs to say, how are we going to improve diversity in our science and technology space? And define that diversity to mean all sorts of things, not make it a purely gendered kind of a women only kind of a diversity issue. Diversity is much more than that. And I think what the question for the policy is really to say, how are we going to remove these structural barriers to prevent people who are in the minority in science to be able to enter that? So some of the examples that Professor Tole gave or Deepanwita gave fit into how could we bring women into science. It addresses structural barriers. I think the policy needs to say, what are these structural barriers that exist for us to improve diversity in the science and technology space in all forms of it, and that is the belief that diversity is good for us, okay, and that diversity is more creative, and that diversity will actually bring rewards, and that a very homogeneous science and technology space then leads to a group think, and you probably don't want that group think, and diversity might actually help in that. So I do think that the policy should shift away from just saying gender to saying diversity.
I agree.
Right, Dr. Soumitra. So rightly said, the gender diversity is what we are going to address. And many of the thematic consultations, they are rightly pointed on this also. So now moving slightly away from this topic, I'll bring startups back to the discussion now. So to start with, I'll invite first Dr. Satya. So he's the founder of a big scheme, that is Biotechnology Ignition Grant Scheme, that has done wonders for the entrepreneurship culture in India. So Dr. Satya, so over to you now. So how this big made such a big impact in bioeconomy? Dr. Satya.
Thanks, Radhika. I think I can only give a very short answer, of course, but one-line answer, let me say that. Answers don't seem to be sought now here. That is because of the partnerships that BIRAC built. And we have one of the partners here, Deepanwita, IKP. I now sit on the board of another partner here, Venture Center. You had Taslim a couple of days back, Camp. We had FITT at IIT Delhi. We have KIT, TBI, in Bhubaneswar. We have the Kanpur, IIT Kanpur SIIC center there. Initially starting with 3 partners and 5 partners, and now I hear during my time it was 6 we built it to 6 partners, and then now it is around 8 or 9 partners. What I believe. What these partners really brought, and the Pandita, can echo my sentiments here, is places like Venture Center, IKP, C-Camp, and others. What they really brought was taking when I use the word young entrepreneur, I don't mean age-wise. I mean, entrepreneurship you can have when you are at any age. But one of these young entrepreneurs, young idea being fertilized, by someone, and take them through the different, hoops that they possibly would have fallen into. So basically mentoring them, basically making sure that they are not drifting away, looking into tons of challenges. They call a valley of death. There is not one valley of death. There are thousands of valleys of death, and also interacting with different valleys of death is by the time a startup is 2 years into it and has gotten maybe $100,000-$200,000, around 1.5 crores. Once the proof of concept is ready, how to then do the validation studies, how to interact and raise money. Thousands of things that a startup has to think through are being helped by places like IKP, like Venture Center, like C-Camp. And I must say, each of these incubators have amazing people. I mean, I sit on the board of Venture Center, and when I see the team there, and I'm a very good friend of IKP, and when I see the team there, it is humbling to see. I mean, they work beyond anything that I have seen globally anywhere. So in some way, I think we should document this. When we talk about good practices, what has been done in terms of system nimbleness, governance, response time, we've got to look at these organizations and document them. So I think big is big because of this, right? Because I would say 100% because of the partners that we have had, right? Definitely. But now we have transitioned into a stage. What I wrote an article a month back of a Biospectrum, where I said we have now reached a time where we have become a land of prototypes. How do you make a land from prototypes to a land of impactful products, right? Or processes, as Soumitra said, right? So land of impactful innovation, let's say. And so from an early nascent stage, we are now maybe early maturity, but we have really not scaled, right? And that phase change requires a different kind of engagement. And again, I think when I look at the incubator systems here, some like IKP, like Venture Center, C-Camps of the world, they are also transitioning and into providing that portfolio of support for the next phase, right? So how do you really do manufacturing? How do you take it to the market? Because when the innovation meets the market, is where, as they say in Hindi, "Doodh ka doodh, pani ka pani ho jata hai," right? Everything becomes clear what happens. So how do our startups and SMEs start navigating this? So the push system that I see over the last 7-9 years has done very well. We have now so many startups, but now I think there has to be a pull system. And again, to somebody's point, and I think it was Soumitra, is to how do we look, and again, it comes to the governance as well. How do we simplify, clarify, document a system of pool of public, especially public procurement systems. And the regulatory maze that these companies will go through, so that like even an academic project, hopefully these products are not just gathering dust in the self, right? And that is a very important thing. We as a system have to look into it, because a lot of public money has gone into building the system up to this stage, and a lot of hard work by our partners, so the next stage, what I see needs a different kind of a bouquet of with the support services that need to be provided. Many of us incubators are ready to provide those. A lot of them are not, but that's true for any place. And I think systems like public procurement, systems like technology, licensing, transfer, the regulation part of it, and a lot of it is also increasing positive serendipity within the system, right? Let's not disregard the value of a serendipitous event happening between a startup and a big company, BD person, right? So those kind of platforms need to be created where the startups can come and take and leverage those systems. But I'll end by commenting one thing. When I was in BIRAC, we had an amazing person who started a program called Yozma in Israel. So Yozma kind of transformed a lot of technology sectors in Israel, and he was the founder of that. And after we approached him a couple of years, and then finally he was happy to come, and we were very happy that he came. But while interviewing him and putting it on the newsletter, he said, you know what, I don't want Israel to continue as a startup country, right? Obviously, you understand what he meant by that. He said, we've got to go beyond being just happy being a startup country, right? And what he really meant was exactly that. How do you take product and processes innovation to really at the doorstep? And that doorstep can be a remote Kashba somewhere in the middle of Sambalpur, where I grew up, right? And when I started tracking what Israel is doing, Israel has actually now saying publicly that they want to transition from being a startup nation to being a smart nation. I mean, look at the lovely usage of the phrase here, right? And I think that's what, in some way, we need to incorporate. There have been a lot of young talent, and again, when I use the word underlying young, I don't mean age. I mean, young ideas that have been proven now, that works in the lab, that has proof of concept. There are many success stories despite what we have. I mean, you heard about Mall Big Tech, Strand Life Sciences. You can hear about My Lab now, or Geotronics. Many that I see being pulled, including in diverse areas. You name it. Using data science to look at X-ray, chest X-ray, and predicting something, So you name it, and I think we are doing it. That's not the point. That of course, with a billion people, so many ingenious mind, that will happen. What we are falling short is, besides the procedural thing that was nicely mentioned here, is the thing about making these startups scale, right? And making sure that they don't fall between the cracks, fall between the valleys. And how do we do that? I think it needs, again, more discussion, but the time is now. I say that because COVID-19 in some way showed the mirror to us, right? On one part, we were amazed by the response we got from our startups and from our academics who pulled together, and then built things that were needed. But in the other, we also realized that we were lacking a system in healthcare. That is actually more complex than rocket science, let me say it this way. But it is high time now for a country of close to 1.5 billion people to look at its own problems and see the solutions they build are best in class, they're affordable, they can go to last mile, And hey presto, if you build all of this, they can also be transplanted into many other parts of the world, including, I won't say only India-like countries, but also into developed countries as well. And there are examples there too. So a great beginning. It is like a one day or a test match. The middle order has to really now start to kick in, right? We cannot always depend on Dhoni's last over to take us, beyond the boundary. Over to you.
Thank you so much for seriously telling us how startups are so important and how we need to build a strength so that more and more startups can be created. And giving the Israel example, how we have to move from a startup economy to a smart economy was definitely what India should come up with. So with this, discussion on startup would not be enough. I'll request Ms. Deepanwita, before requesting her to give her comments, there are loads of questions that are coming up on this startup topic. We have different questions like from Professor Tiwari from Punjab University, then many of the young researchers. They're asking how MSMEs can be roped up, how funding agencies can be roped up to enhance the startup ecosystem in India. And Ms. Deepanwita, you are a perfect person to answer that. So over to you.
Thank you, Radhika. In our 20 years journey, IKP has supported about 620 startups so far. And through various funding programs, through mentoring, through incubation. And if I look at the funding, we were taking a call of all the fundings that we have provided. It's about 290 startups. Innovation projects have been supported, not specifically startups. There are some innovation projects. So all put together, 290 projects have been, innovations have been supported. So what we need is definitely, in this context, I'm not going to discuss points other than interconnectedness, because governance and interconnectedness are areas we are talking about today. So what we really need to see, if we have to see the movement, in the country, we have about 50,000 startups today. And if you look at the number of incubators by our Startup India website, I think it's about 611 when I looked at it 2 weeks back, and about 120 odd accelerators, and around maybe 12 science parks. So, and we are fortunate to be a science park and an incubator. We have 9 incubators, and we also run some accelerator programs. So when we're talking of 611 incubators, and I look at the map of the incubators, where they are located, there are over 50 incubators in Hyderabad, in Bangalore, in Mumbai, in Pune, in Delhi, and there are white spaces in the country where there is hardly one incubator or no incubators. There are hardly any mentors. There are very few startups. And all this would probably be about 2/3 of the population we are talking about. This is almost like invisible India. We have really, really not either worked for the problems of this invisible India, or we have not put up infrastructures and programs for making these areas thrive. We run with BIRAC a program called BIRAC Regional Innovation Center, where we are looking at 23 clusters. A week back, I did a cluster we call open dialogues. Open dialogues means we actually get in various people from the cluster and we say, let's talk. And it's about 2 hours kind of session. It was with Himachal and J&K. There is a startup association in J&K, in Jammu and Kashmir, with 100 startups. Who thought Jammu and Kashmir would have 100 startups? I don't think all of them are doing cutting edge science. Not all of them are but they're solving some problem. They may be solving small local problems, but there is an entrepreneurial ability. There is an interest to serve the country. There is an interest to do something which is positive. In Himachal Pradesh, at least we actually had 3 partners in this discussion. One is IHBT Palampur, it's a CSIR institute. We had IIT Mandi, which is an MHRD institute, and we had an incubator and a university called Mata Vaishno Devi University in Jammu. So we were looking at a state university, we looked at IIT, and we looked at a CSIR institute. And in Himachal, actually, we found there are 11 incubators and again, at least 100 startups. So we are actually not tapping the talent that is, so interconnectedness, it is our duty to actually, those who are very privileged. So we have incubators in Hyderabad, in Bangalore, we interact. We can always do that. But how many of our startups are solving problems? Either you have to solve problems that really benefit the beneficiaries in this white space India, where there are less research institutes, less incubators, less, and how do we make that happen? And I think that should be a part of our policy. So with that, I will end, because I know, for example, if Dr. Rupinder Tiwari has asked a question, or so many others, so I can just go on. But you know, there are solutions that are possible, and all of us can only come together, put together, discuss, and through an interconnected network, solve a lot of our issues and problems. Only if we have our governance in place, if we have our funding in place, if we are nimble. There's one last thing I want to tell. There is somehow a lack of trust. We sometimes have extra governance. The funding agencies fail to trust. And I think while we need to put governance principles in startups and see how they function, I think there is a need to trust a lot of ideas, a lot of people, and go forward. So scaling is one issue, spreading, diffusion is one issue. So we really need to work on several, because Satya touched upon scale, so I didn't touch the scale part of interconnection, but I touched upon the diffusion part of interconnection. Yes.
Right. Thank you so much. It's so well. And I'm receiving so many questions on entrepreneurship, but keeping this paucity of time in
Radhika,
mind,
I think Dr. Satya.
Okay. Dr. Satya, quick intervention from you, and then I'll request Vanshika to, because we are almost reaching to end of our discussion panel. Vanshika, then last question over to you. So, sure. Dr. Satya, over to you.
Right. No, I think I just wanted to touch upon what Deepanwita mentioned. And I think there was also some point by Soumitra on this. Especially when you if you are in a trench, so if you are in a trenches, and if you're working as a co-founder of a startup, or if you are an academic, doing research in a place like PIFR, but the point about interconnectedness is, from the startup world, initially we would say, hey, if you're building a medtech product, do you have clinicians on board? Or, then we graduated to say that, hey, is your product designed for manufacturing ready, DFM ready? You're building 10 products now in a lab level. Can you do order of 100? So validation becomes a question. Here, I think something interconnectedness where we haven't talked, and I think Soumitra did mention it in his initial intervention, is how do we bring in non-profit organizations? I worked in Paths, for example. They know how to take things to the last mile. I worked, I've seen WIS Foundation closely. And in the diagnostic space, there is FIND. So we got to learn some of the journeys, some of the ways that nonprofits have been successful in delivering healthcare. And whether it is in diagnostics like FIND, or whether, Path has an amazing program on TB, for example, in Bombay, Mumbai, which has been now scaled across India, or Wish Foundation for that matter. Both in healthcare, education, women empowerment, all these issues where the social issues come along, we've got to interact with these agencies, these organizations, and incorporate their views into our science and technology policy. And I think I would request Radhika, Vanshika, and Shagun to, I know you're doing like 20 webinars, so you're tired, but I'm sure you reached out to some. But if you intend to reach out to these places, I think collectively between Deepanwita, me, Soumitra, and Shubha, we can, of course, the network that you may have, please reach out to get get their insights, how those can be integrated, is what I wanted to say. The second point, quick point I wanted to say was, I think there is a simple thing. There's what we sense every time there is a platform like this is that, it's thanks to the PSA office to giving this platform to vent, right? And we vent because we are in a pressure cooker world, right? And there is not a platform where I would say, if your postdocs and PhDs can walk through different government agency and see what the junior section officer is going through when you have a pile of files that you have to write and other things. So again, it's the system process. How can you do, what's the pressure on them? Similarly, if you have those people come and walk in the corridors of, TIFR or NCBS or CCMB, just for a day to see what young scientists or PIs are doing and how the funds that they release are so important that they come on time, is something, I guess, that divide can close, because that adds to what Deepanwita was saying about trust. It's about trust, it's about empathy. It's really about compassion and empathy of the other side, right? And there is actually no other side here, it's the same country. So somehow we've got to bring these two important stakeholders, the government on the one side and the academia and the industry at the three. And we talk about going to conferences and all that. Let the government people come into your labs and see what you are doing. Let your PhD go and walk through the what the office condition of many of our government offices are like, right? And then I think there will be some form of an acceptance, some form of empathy being built from both the sides. It's over to you now.
Sure. So building on that last point of yours, I think to collate all that we have discussed throughout the panel, there's this one last question that we'll take up that has come up from Satya on Twitter. And she raises a very valid point. She talks about, this fine balance when we're talking about interconnected systems. That fine line is between autonomy in that particular relationship and, the accountability that you have to your partner. So how can some of the conflicts that might arise in these sort of interconnected enterprises can be resolved? So maybe a one-liner from each of the panelists, and then we come to a close session. Can we start with Dr. Soumitra?
Hi, thanks. One-liner is, I think we need process innovation. We need to recognize, and I think the policy needs to recognize that we need process innovation in governance of technology policy governance happens, and to recognize that that just as we are beginning to recognize that research management is a specialist exercise, also governing science and technology policy is a specialist exercise and should be run by people who actually understand it. And we should not automatically assume that if somebody is very good at doing their physics and ran a successful lab, they will be able to then run the same thing again. Not that they can't, but I don't think there should be an assumption. I think it's a very specialized skill. And I'll stop there. I know we are short of time.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Deepanwita, would you like to take this forward? Ma'am, your this one is muted. Can you unmute yourself, please?
Yes. The fine balance between different kinds of institutions to come together and work. Again, I would stress on proper contracts and trust. So it's both believing each other, trusting each other, but at the same time having contracts that are deliverable. So what we need is transparency. We need efficiency. We need certainty of processes. I can't say whether if I cannot say whether it can be done in 2 weeks or 2 years, no one is interested in taking things forward. So there has to be reasonable certainty, there has to be transparency, there has to be efficiency in processes, trust and contracts where we can go to and say, yes, we have said this. So that's my take.
Thank you. Mr. Tole, can we have your comments?
We need process diagnostics. We need to understand what's the problem, okay? Because this is just the first order of business, and we need to respect young people.
Such a broad topics, that is, one is STI governance, another system interconnectedness. I hope so we did a justice to both the domains. One is the governance and other is the system interconnectedness. There are loads of questions coming up. I'll request audience to keep posting them. So we will be including them into our next policy framework structure. So with this, I thank all the panelists, and for formally give a vote of thanks, I'll request Vanshika to convey the thanks to everyone.
Sure. With this, we come to the end of today's panel. And true to the essence of Science Policy Forum, this has been a very fruitful exercise to enable dialogue. I'm sorry, am I audible? Sure. Okay.
Yeah, you are.
So saying that this has been very fruitful as an exercise to enable dialogue between public and experts and feed multiple voices into the policy drafting procedure. I thank our panelists, Dr. Soumitra, Professor Shubha, Mr. Deepanwita, and Dr. Satya for taking the time to engage with us. And finally, a big shout out to the front and back end team of Science Policy Forum for working day in and day out to make this happen. Do stay tuned in to be an active voice in the remaining 9 panels that we have in the series across the table. Thank you and have a great evening ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.